The cameras are rolling. Jasmine Crockett unleashes bombshell-proof, leaked transcripts, a forged exam, and a $7.5 million payoff that turned Barron Trump's failing grades into a shining diploma. He mocks, he smirks. Then the evidence crushes him into silence before a stunned nation. Has justice just destroyed America's most untouchable name? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The United States Congress turned into a battlefield of suspense cameras, blinking red, tens of millions watching live. The air was thick electric, as though every second ticked closer to an explosion. All eyes locked on Barron Trump, lounging in the witness chair, like it was built for him, arrogance radiating in every movement. Barron raised a diploma, flashing it like a trophy. I graduated with highest honors. I am proof that the Trump bloodline is superior. No one in this chamber can compare to me. His words cracked across the room, sparking gasps and angry whispers. Reporters snapped frantically. Lawmakers shifted in disbelief, some shaking their heads. The arrogance hit like a slap impossible to ignore. Barron turned toward Jasmine Crockett, lips curling into a sneer. A second-rate lawyer like you could never understand Ivy League brilliance. The jab pierced the silence. Jasmine rose, folder of documents in hand, her eyes sharp as a blade. Her voice cut like thunder. Today America will know the truth. This is not a diploma of honor, it is evidence of fraud. The room froze. Every breath held the drama explosive. The chamber was trembling with anticipation, and Jasmine struck without hesitation. She opened the folder in her hands and raised her voice. These are the official transcripts, she declared. The screen behind her lit up, and Barron Trump's academic record came into full view. In bold, merciless red, constitutional law, F economics, F probability and statistics, F gasps swept the chamber like thunder rolling across the sky. Senators leaned forward, whispering to each other. Reporters slammed their keyboards. The public gallery buzzed in disbelief. Barron sat back, still smirking, though his jaw twitched at the sight of those failing marks. Jasmine didn't pause. She snapped her fingers, and the next slide flashed on the big screen. It was the original constitutional law exam, marked in harsh red ink. The proctor's signature sprawled across the corner beside a single brutal note. No submission, grade 0. The silence was suffocating. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate before focusing in. It was proof, irrefutable and devastating, that Barron Trump hadn't even turned in his work. Lawmakers exchanged grim stares. Reporters raised their phones higher, broadcasting this bombshell to millions. Then Jasmine went for the kill. She flipped to the next exhibit, a second version of the very same exam. Nearly identical in layout, but this time the answers gleamed perfect, every question answered correctly. Across the top in neat black font, final grade 95 out of 100. The difference was staggering. The audience gasped again, a wave of outrage filling the chamber. Jasmine pointed to the corner of the screen where a digital stamp glowed. Metadata analysis revealed the file had been edited not by the university, but by a Trump family aide's laptop. The fix was clear, cold, and deliberate. A roar of disbelief spread through the chamber. Unbelievable, someone muttered. Senators shifted in their seats, some shaking their heads in open disgust. The press gallery erupted, cameras, flashing nonstop, journalists hammering out the words, Trump exam fraud exposed. This wasn't an error. It was academic forgery on the highest stage. Barron chuckled, breaking the storm with a mocking sneer. He leaned into the microphone. Ms. Crockett, do you honestly think the American people care? If I turned in a paper, I am a Trump. I am a brand, not a student. His arrogance rolled across the hall like poison, the entitlement stinging every listener. Jasmine stepped closer, her eyes unblinking, her words slicing the air. You claim to graduate with highest honors, she said, her voice cutting like steel. Yet you couldn't even pass the most basic courses. Your brand is built on failure covered up with fraud. The words struck like a hammer. Gasps and angry shouts filled the chamber, the tension erupting into chaos. Reporters stood to capture every angle. This was the first devastating blow, and it had landed hard. The myth of honor had been torn apart. In its place stood the undeniable truth: Barron Trump's shining diploma was nothing more than a monument to deceit. The chamber was still shaking from Jasmine's reveal when the outside world exploded. Headlines flashed across every phone and laptop: Barron Trump's fake exam exposed. The phrase ghost exam raced through social media, turning into a storm of outrage. America wasn't just watching anymore, it was raging. Ivy League students were the first to pour fuel on the fire. They posted side-by-side photos of the two exams, the original stamped "No Submission," grade 0, and the doctored copy marked "Final grade 95 out of 100." Captions cut deep: "We study, he cheats." Within minutes, thousands of reposts spread the images everywhere. For students drowning in debt, the contrast was unbearable, a punch straight to the gut. Back in the chamber, Barron folded his arms, grinning with contempt. He leaned into the mic. "She's only good at digging dirt, and that's what she calls justice." His mockery rang through the hall, dismissing Jasmine as if the evidence meant nothing. But that arrogance only fanned the flames. Across the country, people shouted at their screens. Parents, teachers, workers all saw not just a scandal, but a betrayal. The tide of fury had begun to surge. The uproar from the exam scandal was still echoing when Jasmine called her next witness. An older man with gray hair and a trembling hand stepped forward. His name was Edward Mallory, a former officer in the university's academic affairs office. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and spoke into the microphone. "That day, we heard a voice we could never mistake. It was direct, commanding, and it came with an order that shook us all." The chamber hushed instantly. Every camera zoomed in, every reporter leaned forward. Jasmine nodded at Edward and reached for the control panel. A click, and the speakers filled the room with a voice the whole world recognized. Donald Trump's gravelly tone thundered, "Change Barron's grade from an F to an A. If Barron's scores are not corrected, don't expect another dollar from the Trump Foundation. Do you want this university to go bankrupt?" The words hung in the air like a bomb. For a moment, even the cameras seemed to stop rolling, the silence cutting deeper than any noise could. All eyes shifted at once to Barron. The lens zoomed in on his face. His smirk wavered, his lips pressed thin. A drop of sweat glistened at his temple, betraying the calm facade. He forced a crooked smile, trying to mask the tremor in his hands. The room was still frozen in shock, the tape echoing in every corner of the chamber. For the first time, the scandal was no longer just about a fake exam. It had turned into a story of extortion and corruption at the highest level. But Barron refused to let silence define the moment. He leaned forward, his voice sharp and defiant, cutting through the tension. "Yes, my father protects me," he snapped, glaring at Jasmine. "And what did your father ever do for you? Without power, you'll always be nothing more than an ordinary name." His words dripped with venom, aimed like a dagger at Jasmine's pride. The chamber gasped, the insult searing across the airwaves. The reaction was immediate and violent. The public gallery exploded in boos and shouts, a chorus of outrage rolling over the marble walls. "Shame," someone yelled. Others screamed for justice. Senators pounded the table, trying to restore order, but the fury was unstoppable. Reporters scribbled furiously, their headlines already forming "From Fake Exam to Academic Blackmail." The evidence had twisted the scandal into something darker, and Barron's arrogance poured gasoline on the flames. The noise grew deafening, the crowd's anger louder than the gavel pounding for silence. It was no longer just an academic fraud, it was a scheme of power, money, and threats. The chamber had become an arena, and the country was watching every second, shocked, furious, and unable to look away. Outside the hearing, the shock detonated into action like a fuse finally lit. Campus quads filled with marching students, handmade signs, lifted high phone cameras, streaming every step, drums beating time, sidewalks trembling with footsteps. From Harvard to Penn to Columbia, the chant hammered the streets. "We study, he pays." Drivers honked in rhythm, professors watched from windows, some wiping tears they couldn't hide. Janitors paused their carts, security radios crackled with crowd reports. Clips of the two exams flashed on giant screens, 0 on one, 95 on the other. The contrast brutal, impossible to explain away. Debt-burdened seniors shouted into megaphones, voices cracking with anger and relief and resolve. Inside and out, the pressure surged toward Congress. Opposition lawmakers stepped to the microphones and demanded immediate subpoenas, emergency hearings, and a special counsel. We will investigate now. One vowed as aides drafted letters, and cameras swarmed like hornets. Barron tilted his chin and laughed into the noise, daring the nation. Go ahead and investigate. Trump never loses. The gallery erupted boos, drowning the gavel, while comment sections and town squares ignited together. Across the country, people called it a stain on American education and a moment that must not be ignored. As the uproar outside surged from street protests to exploding headlines inside, Jasmine kept pressing, tightening every question like a vice. Barron's composure cracked. He shot to his feet and slammed the table, the microphone rattling. Ms. Crockett, do you think you are better than me? I am Trump. I do not need exams. I can buy any professor if I want. The blowback was instant. Papers jumped water, glasses trembled, aides froze mid-note, and a pen rolled off the dais. The hearing room went quiet, a vacuum of sound that made every breath audible, every heartbeat loud. Cameras erupted in rapid bursts, shutters strobing across his face as if mapping the fall. Jasmine advanced 3 steady steps, eyes locked, voice tempered to a razor, her heels clicking on marble. You just confessed. This is no longer a suspicion. This is a confession. Barron curled a smirk, tilting his chin as if the room were beneath him. A confession? This is power, and power always defeats justice. Gasps flared, a row of lawmakers recoiled, and the gallery hissed like a live wire. In that instant, he turned himself into the emblem of lawless arrogance, daring the nation to blink twice. The chamber was still ringing from Barron's arrogant declaration when Jasmine reached for one last folder. The room hushed, the tension pulled tighter. She slid a single sheet from inside and held it up for the cameras. Her voice was calm, almost surgical. This, she said, is the financial record. The screen behind her lit up with the image of a bank transfer. Trump Foundation to the University Development Fund, amount $7,500, date April 14, 2022. The timing was unmistakable. It was the exact day Barron's failing grade in constitutional law was turned into a top score. The coincidence was too perfect, too damning. Jasmine pointed at the bottom of the transfer slip where a digital seal glowed. Forensic verification blazed in bold text. Electronic signature confirmed. Authentic. Cannot be forged. The words hung like a hammer over the chamber. Reporters erupted, their keyboards clattering in panic to push the headline first. Senators leaned toward the screen, lips parted in shock. This wasn't rumor, speculation, or a whispered accusation. It was hard evidence branded in ink and code, showing money moving directly in exchange for grades. Then the screen flickered again, and a different set of images appeared. They weren't financial records, but photographs the nation remembered. There was actress Lori Loughlin, wrists shackled, head lowered, as federal agents escorted her through a courthouse in 2019. Next came Felicity Huffman, hands cuffed in front of her, cameras flashing wildly as she was pushed past a wall of reporters. The infamous Varsity Blues scandal came roaring back to life side by side with Barron Trump's case. The room froze, collective memory colliding with the present. Jasmine's voice dropped lower, slower, each word deliberate. These people went to prison for buying their children's way into college. They broke the law. They were punished. And now Barron Trump. What about him? Or does American justice only apply to ordinary families? The question detonated across the chamber like a bomb. Her words were simple, but they cut straight to the heart of the outrage. The reaction was instant and overwhelming. The gallery erupted, shouts echoing off the marble. Shame, fraud. The noise shook the chamber until the chairman's gavel pounded in vain. Opposition lawmakers slammed their hands on the table in applause, their faces alight with vindication. One shouted over the din, "This is the proof we demanded." The clamor rolled like thunder, unstoppable, electric. Cameras zoomed in on Barron. His earlier smirk had vanished. He sat hunched, shoulders caved, eyes darting down. Sweat beaded across his pale forehead, his lips pressed shut. For the first time, Barron Trump looked cornered. He bowed his head and his face turned ashen white under the unforgiving lights. The image broadcast across America was devastating, not the air of power, not the brand of invincibility, but the embodiment of guilt, arrogance shattered by proof. After the transfer receipt and the Varsity Blues photos hit the screen, the shock didn't fade. It detonated across the media within seconds for everyone watching at home, nationwide. Homepages flipped to black banners, and bold fonts pushed notifications stacked like shell bursts, and a single headline marched across every feed: Trump family and Varsity Blues 2.0. Anchors spoke in clipped tones, producers looped the exam images, and Chiron lines hammered the same idea again and again: money for grades, privilege over merit, scandal on parade. Commentators replayed the tape and circled the date, noting how the $500,000 landed the very day the grades switched from failure to excellence publicly. The story was no longer a rumor to argue about. It had become a national indictment unfolding in real time, unavoidable, undeniable, and unbearably public. Phones lit up in kitchens and subways as even apolitical viewers paused to read to listen, whispering, "This feels different. This feels bigger. This feels like something that cannot be shrugged off." Across campuses, coast to coast, students poured into quads and streets, printing posters, stringing banners, and lining up behind drums and megaphones. They lifted placards high and kept the chant, "Relentless academic justice," for all voices braided into one rolling wave that bounced off brick facades and glass libraries. Phone screens flashed the side-by-side evidence, the original stamped "No Submission," grade 0, and the edited version stamped "Final grade 95 out of 100, and the crowd roared each time the images appeared. Seniors buried in loans shouted into bullhorns, first-generation freshmen cried angry tears, and campus workers raised fists alongside professors who had graded through the night for years. The march rhythm built like a heartbeat, a reminder that every scholarship, every class, every hour of study means nothing at all if power can buy the ending for the chosen few forever. They passed libraries chanting classmates' names, vowing they would not let donors decide the price of truth. The chorus widened as teachers, veterans, and shift workers called into radio shows and town halls. "We work hard, our kids study hard, and the Trumps buy degrees." Factory whistles marked changeover, while union members held up pay stubs and tuition bills, pointing at the camera to say what their taxes and time were supposed to guarantee fairness. In the middle of the storm, Barron appeared on a studio set jacket, perfect smile polished, and fired off a sneer for the cameras. "You're only famous because of me." The clip blasted across feeds, but instead of blunting the outrage, it sharpened it, landing like a final insult to anyone who ever earned a grade the long way. By nightfall, the verdict of opinion was merciless and unanimous. His taunt was not strength. It was the last straw, the face of arrogance people refused to accept ever again. Across time zones, a single refusal hardened grades are earned. Degrees are earned, and no family name gets to rewrite that. Not in classrooms, not in boardrooms, not on television. The headlines had barely cooled when the hammer of government came down. Congress announced it would convene a special panel, its title printed in stark black on official letterhead: Political Influence in Education. It wasn't a suggestion or a study committee. It was an investigation with subpoena power, televised hearings, and a mandate to dig as deep as the roots of American privilege would allow. Overnight, the scandal wasn't just about Barron Trump. It had become a national reckoning with the way power and money warped the classroom itself. The announcement landed like a cannon blast. Journalists swarmed Capitol Hill, cameras mounted outside the hearing rooms, waiting to capture the first subpoenas delivered by armed clerks. Protesters gathered on the steps holding signs that read, "Justice for students and no more bought degrees." The tension was so thick it seemed to bleed from the stone columns of the Capitol itself. For every student who felt cheated, for every teacher who stayed up until 2 a.m. grading papers, this was the moment to watch. America had finally declared war on corruption in its schools. Universities, the crown jewels of higher education, were suddenly on the defensive. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, Stanford, names spoken with reverence, now found themselves with subpoenas at their doors. They were ordered to open their vaults, expose their admissions lists, reveal their donor records. Every dollar traced, every acceptance letter scrutinized. What had once been whispered, that student only got in because of their family's money, was about to be shouted in the halls of Congress, with evidence projected on screens for the entire nation to see. Administrators scrambled, lawyers lined their tables, but the tide was too strong. The days of quiet deals behind ivy-covered walls were ending. Jasmine Crockett became the face of this storm. The same lawmaker who had stood folder in hand tearing through Barron Trump's smug defenses was now being hailed in editorials and primetime specials. The woman who brought fairness back to American education, one headline declared. Her speeches were replayed endlessly, her cross-examinations studied like championship matches. She was compared to crusaders of the past figures who had dragged corruption into the light. And unlike most politicians, she seemed almost uncomfortable with the praise. "This isn't about me," she told a reporter. "It's about every kid who thought hard work was enough only to find the game was rigged." But across the country in the Trump family compound, the mood was darker than it had ever been. Donald Trump, a man who had built his empire on branding and bravado, now found himself with a son who had turned into a liability. The scandal wasn't dying down, it was metastasizing. Every late-night comedian, every Sunday political panel, every news broadcast repeated the same footage. Barron sneering Barron, shouting Barron boasting he could buy professors. Clips were spliced with the $7,500 and $1,000 transfer receipt, with Lori Loughlin in handcuffs with Felicity Huffman in tears. The narrative was clear. Barron Trump had become the poster boy for everything Americans despised about privilege. Inside Congress, the investigation turned relentless. Witnesses were called sworn in, grilled under lights. Former deans spoke in clipped tones about development admissions. Accountants detailed suspicious donations that matched perfectly with sudden acceptances. One professor broke down as she admitted being pressured to change a grade after a trustee's phone call. The words Trump Foundation came up again and again, each time sparking murmurs in the hearing room. And every mention dragged Barron deeper into the quicksand, making him not just a spoiled student, but a symbol of systemic rot. Meanwhile, outside, the movement grew. Students marched not only in New York and Boston, but in small towns across the Midwest chanting, "We study, he pays," until their voices cracked. Teachers joined, bringing report cards and stacks of ungraded papers as proof of their own endless labor. Veterans carried faded diplomas saying they had fought overseas for a country that promised fairness, only to see the children of power leapfrog their own. Factory workers walked off shifts still in overalls, holding up signs. "My kid's GPA is higher than his bank account." It was raw, it was angry, and it was unstoppable. And every chant, every sign, every voice pointed back to the same source, Barron Trump. He tried to fight it with bravado. In a televised interview, his hair slicked back, and his grin forced, he leaned into the camera. "Crockett is only famous because of me," he said. "Without me, she's nobody." He expected to rattle her to shift the narrative. Instead, the country recoiled. The quote ricocheted online as the final insult, the ultimate act of arrogance. Hashtags turned venomous Barron the bully fraud. You justice for students. What he meant as a dismissal became gasoline on the fire. In congressional offices, lawmakers whispered that the scandal could change everything. Campaign strategists ran new polling trust in universities was collapsing, support for sweeping reform was surging. Jasmine Crockett's approval numbers spiked, her face appearing on magazine covers with captions like, "The People's Advocate and the Educator's Champion." For the first time in decades, the words education reform weren't boring policy talk, they were the centerpiece of American outrage. Parents who had never cared about tuition caps now demanded transparency. Voters who had ignored admissions debates now wanted criminal charges. Donald Trump's allies begged him to distance himself from his son. "Let Barron take the fall," one advisor urged. "The base will forgive you if you show leadership." But Trump, bound by blood and pride, refused. He snarled in private meetings, insisting the Trumps never lose. Yet every poll showed the opposite. The family name was bleeding support, hemorrhaging credibility. Barron, once marketed as the heir of the dynasty, was now described in headlines as the anchor dragging Trump politics under. Inside the Trump household, arguments grew bitter. Barron complained he was being used as a scapegoat, his arrogance undimmed. "They should be thanking me," he barked at aides. "I put the spotlight on Crockett. I gave them ratings." But in quiet corners, even family loyalists admitted the truth. He had done more damage than any opponent could have dreamed. What Jasmine had started in that hearing room had spiraled into a national earthquake, and the aftershocks showed no sign of ending. For the universities, the investigation was a nightmare they couldn't escape. One by one, they released donor logs, admissions, spreadsheets, records that had never been meant for daylight. Reporters combed through the files, finding case after case where millions in donations preceded miraculous acceptances. Ivy League reputations cracked like old plaster. In hearing after hearing, lawmakers demanded answers, and each evasive reply only fueled suspicion. The image of prestige was collapsing, and in its rubble, Jasmine's words echoed, "This is not about honor. This is about fraud." The effect on the public was seismic. Families who had felt powerless suddenly saw hope and accountability. Talk shows featured mothers who worked 3 jobs to send kids to community college, fathers who mortgage homes for tuition, all now demanding, if they cheat, they must pay. Petitions gathered millions of signatures, pushing Congress to pass laws that would end backdoor admissions. And every story, every face, every plea returned to the spark: Jasmine Crockett exposing Barron Trump. By now, Jasmine herself had become more than a lawmaker. She was a symbol, a rallying point. People painted murals of her holding a folder like a shield, her eyes blazing across brick walls in city centers. Editorials praised her as fearless. "She gave us our voice back," one columnist wrote. Even her opponents had to acknowledge her impact. A conservative commentator, gritting his teeth, admitted on air, "She has forced the country to confront what we've ignored for too long." Meanwhile, the Trump family could barely breathe under the pressure. Lawsuits loomed, subpoenas multiplied, and whispers grew that donors were pulling back. Political allies distanced themselves, muttering that the name Trump was now toxic. For Barron, every step outside became a gauntlet of cameras, chants, and jeers. His arrogance had once fueled his brand. Now it sealed his downfall. His smirk was replayed as evidence of contempt, his words carved into history as proof of entitlement. And as the investigation widened, Donald Trump himself faced a brutal reality. The child he had hoped to present as his legacy had become his greatest liability. Advisors called it the Barron effect, a drag on polls, a magnet for outrage, a reminder that the Trump dynasty was no longer untouchable. What had begun as a scandal about a single grade now threatened to unravel an empire. The chamber was still vibrating with tension. Papers scattered across desks, cameras blinked red, and the smell of sweat and fear lingered in the air. Barron Trump sat hunched, his smirk-erased shoulders heavy as whispers darted between lawmakers. In the gallery, the public leaned forward, waiting. Jasmine Crockett rose slowly, folder in hand, her shadow stretching like a verdict already cast. Every moment of the scandal had led to this silence. She walked to the microphone, heels clicking on marble. The hush was absolute. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Jasmine steadied herself, then delivered the line that would echo across history. "A great nation cannot be built on diplomas that are bought. Justice exists only when every child has a fair chance." Her words cut through the air like steel, drawing gasps and murmurs from every corner of the chamber. For a second, silence. Then a student in the front row stood up, tears on her face, holding a pencil above her head. Another joined, then dozens more. Veterans in worn jackets, patches faded by time, rose and lifted pencils like banners of defiance. Workers' hands calloused from factory lines, clenched pencils in fists raised high. Soon the entire gallery was on its feet, pencils stabbing upward like torches. The symbol was simple and fragile, yet it shook the room harder than any chant. The cameras caught it instantly. Screens filled with the image, pencils raised, faces determined. Anchors scrambled to describe it, their voices trembling. On social media, the screenshots spread like fire. Within minutes, millions had seen it. Within hours, the movement had a symbol, and it carried more force than any headline. Jasmine did not flinch. She let the wave of emotion roll, then leaned closer to the mic. "This is not just about one family," she declared. "This is about every mother working 2 jobs, every father sacrificing hours, every child studying by lamplight because they believed in the promise of America." Her voice cracked like thunder, calm but burning with fury. The camera swung back to Barron. His head was low, eyes downcast, lips pressed tight. The arrogance was gone. For the first time, he had no sneer, no words. The image would replay endlessly: Barron Trump. Silent, head bowed, privilege stripped bare. A symbol of collapse seen by millions. Outside the chamber, the clip began to spread. By midnight, it had crossed 50 million views, trending at the top of every platform. Titles were blunt: "The Day Justice Spoke." Commentators could only play it uncut. No spin could erase the sight of raised pencils, the sound of Jasmine's voice, the bowed head of Barron. The evidence was already viral. Back inside, Jasmine's gaze swept the gallery. Students, veterans, workers, every face turned to her, pencils raised like proof of their shared demand. Slowly she turned to the camera, staring straight into millions of homes. Her eyes locked with the lens, her voice steady as stone. Justice is not a privilege. It is the right of us all. The chamber erupted. Applause thundered from the gallery. Lawmakers shot to their feet, and chants shook the rafters. Outside, protesters joined in, echoing the line across the Capitol steps. In kitchens, classrooms, and break rooms, people repeated the words out loud. Some whispered them, others shouted them. But everywhere the phrase became a promise. The images piled up: a student trembling as she held her pencil high, a veteran's hand shaking but unyielding, a factory worker with grease still on her fingers, clutching her pencil like a flag. Each shot was replayed across feeds, the meaning impossible to miss. A pencil worth pennies had become the weapon of justice against millions of dollars and a dynasty's arrogance. Barron remained frozen, head still bowed. The silence around him was louder than any insult he had hurled before. For months he had laughed at fairness, sneered at the idea of justice. But now under the lights he had nothing. The air of privilege was defeated by ordinary people holding pencils. By morning, the clip had passed 100 million views. The pencil was now a symbol on shirts, banners, murals. Jasmine's words were scrawled on walls and repeated in schools. Justice is not a privilege. It is the right of us all. It was more than a speech, it was a verdict, and the nation watching knew it. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.